We're meeting today on the beautiful lands of the Boon Wurrung, and I pay respects to their elders past and present. Congratulations to Warren Nichols, who curated this stunning exhibition. To walk in and just see that contrast of the soft textiles, the stainless steel works, and these extraordinary paintings it was really moving. Also to Sandra Peters and the team from PICES for their shared determination. And welcome to our three artists, May Adams, Andrew Casper and Mark Schaller. Three very esteemed artists. May's weavings, which you saw as you came in, made almost entirely from indigenous plants on her own bush block at Venus Bay. Warren and I visited her there and were just blown away by the way she works, immersed in her conservation work, then gathering the materials for her weavings and the way that they are displayed throughout her house and how she just lives with them so closely. May's work is in the National Gallery of Australia, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, La Trobe Regional Gallery and the Gippsland Art Gallery. Andrew is our award-winning sculptor. He works in corten and stainless steel, and his work is displayed in many public spaces, Geelong, Neerim South, Inverloch, and also in private collections. You might run into one of his works around Phillip Island or the rest of Bass Coast. He's tended towards kinetic works in more recently, and his mechanical training is coming in very handy for that. But even his static works, there's this extraordinary effect as you walk around them. They seem to be moving. It's really quite exciting. Most recently, he's been interested in inflated stainless steel sculptures, which sounds impossible, but you saw the reality as you walked in here. Just amazing works coming out, and as Andrew said, he loves the fact that he's never quite sure what's going to happen. There's an element of luck in it. Mark Schaller, his bold, vibrant paintings were successful from an early age. In his early 20s, soon after leaving art school, he was already selling his works. The National Gallery of Australia acquired some of his works back then. National Gallery of Victoria has his works, and they're held in many public galleries around Australia and collections overseas as well. 40 years on, he's still painting boldly and humorously. How exhilarating was it to walk in and see our places, Eagle's Nest, Cape Woolamai, to see them transformed by the artist's eye. It was just felt amazing. Thank you, Mark. So we could talk about many things, but today we want to focus on what it means to be outside the Melbourne, Sydney art scene. Specifically, what it means to be an artist in Gippsland. The drawbacks, the benefits, in an age where so many people are working remotely. Does it even matter where you live? Mark, if I could start with you, since you were a member of a hip urban art movement, Raw Studios. You've lived in Melbourne, Prague, New York. You're now living and working in a backwater called Cape Woolamai. Now be honest, yes. Don't you sometimes crave an intelligent conversation about Kandinsky's brushworks or what Kearns was really meant?
No. I can give that a miss, and I don't read a lot of art criticism, and I don't read about other artists really. And I find it it's sort of very esoteric, the language they use, and I don't think it goes hand in hand with what they're doing anyway. And I think judging by other artists, I think the best thing is where the work explains itself and it doesn't really need the criticism that goes with it, which is fine. And I think in the case of Fred Williams, who didn't talk about his work, and there were two art critics who wrote about his work extensively, and they had completely different opinions about it. So it's conjecture, I suppose, and no, and there's enough intellectual stimulation at Phillip Island, I think.
Has the way you worked changed very much since you moved down here permanently?
I've been doing a lot of on plein air painting, which I really enjoy, and it gets me out there, and it's sort of motivating as well. And all sorts of interesting things happen in the landscape. If I go for the cadmium yellow, for instance, bees will be attracted, and if I use the more earth tones, I get echidnas, or maybe the occasional magpie comes along. But and then you meet interesting people who feel as though they have the right to start talking to you because you're not reading a book, you've got a brush in your hand or something like that.
You're not looking at a screen, more likely.
That's right, no one will interrupt you if you're looking at a screen, but with the palette and the brush, they're up for a conversation.
May, I love what you've written about your artistic practice. The act of collecting the materials for your work, preparing the reeds and leaves, etc. And then the stitching and weaving, and you've described it as meditative and personally satisfying, creative and ancient. And it was a beautiful description of that. I know you began life as a painter. Why did you change course into weaving?
I'd been away working for quite a few years in arts administration jobs, like away from my studio and home. Nearly 14 years I was away. And during that time, there's sort of you get a bit of a gap between your practice and, you haven't been making art. I've been working full time in busy jobs, So when I came back to settle down again in Venus Bay, I thought initially I would start painting again, and I started painting and it just wasn't really flowing for me. So I happened by chance to go to an Indigenous cultural information day down at Wilson's Prom, and part of that was just a really short session, about 30 minutes, with one of the aunties showing us how to collect the lamandra plants and do some basic stitching. So we just did something about that round. There's about 30 people in the group. Nice outdoor activity. So I took that home and I harvested plants from my own garden and finished it into a larger piece, and that was the first piece that I made. And it just got me really interested in doing it. I enjoyed it. I started to look at the plants differently around me, because I'd been doing bushland regeneration down there since the early 80s, and this was 2015, so for many years. And a lot of the regeneration work is with all those understory plants. It's all the lower ground dwelling plants are the ones that are the hardest to keep intact, when a landscape has been grazed, or cattle grazed especially. So a lot of the regeneration work that myself and other friends down there had been doing was all to do with the reeds and the rushes and the plants. And so this was just a new way to connect in with those plants. And I just looked around and they were all around me, and I just thought, well, this is a really interesting thing to do. I started from there. But I brought with me into that practice the years of working as a contemporary artist in painting and sculpture. So aesthetically speaking, I didn't start off from scratch as a fibre artist. I kind of came in, you know, after quite a long career of exhibiting and working as an abstract painter and a sculptor. So that's kind of fed into the way that I work with the plants.
Some people might think of Venus Bay as a long way from any sort of art centre, but I reckon Venus Bay has got the highest proportion of artists per capita in Australia.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of people
yes,
down there
and
working.
I know some of your near neighbours, Peter Cole and Colin Suggett.
Yeah, Heather Shimon's there too,
yeah.
she's my neighbour. And Kevin Mortensen until just recently. Kevin's just passed, unfortunately, he died.
So how important is it to have a community of artists around you?
Well, we're not really a community of artists, I guess. When you talk about a community of artists, it sort of makes you think that you're all in everyone's very individual and quite protective, really, of their workspace and their work. We're friends, but we give each other a lot of space and we don't get involved in each other's careers or anything. We're supportive, but very respectfully distant, right? And I think, you know, that's just a respectful protocol amongst creative people, that's how that goes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you don't barge up for a cup of tea when you might be in the middle of...
No, not at all. It's a very respectful relationship. And that means it can therefore be a long-lasting relationship. Yeah.
Andrew, you're living and working at Anderson, and as we all know, all roads lead to Anderson. It's kind of a mysterious place. What do you draw from it, and how does it affect your work?
As in the area?
Yes, yep.
Look, probably my background was we started in Cowes. For 1 year we had a commercial gallery, and I was not trained in the arts. We went to Sandy Point and lived there full time, and we started practicing, myself and my wife, and it was too far from Melbourne, so we ended up coming back here. We've been practicing at Anderson for the last 13 years. What we were finding at Sandy Point, it's so far, it's quite a bit further than Venus.
Yep.
It's extremely hard to get to Melbourne and all the exhibitions, even though I was doing them all. But merely moving to Anderson opened up everything. I've got engineers everywhere. If I need things laser cut, turned, everything's available. So I've been able to increase my repertoire of work. So that's why I've brought on kinetic works. And then most recently mirror stainless with the inflation of the steel. So yeah, it's been fantastic. It's really been a career boost for me. And also, once again, access to courier systems so I can travel work up to Sydney and around Australia as needed or if needed. So it's been fantastic.
And what about the landscape itself? How much is that reflected in your work?
Yeah, sometimes yes and other times no. I'm probably twofold. We've always lived by the ocean, so a lot of my works are oceanside inspired, whereas lately I'm chasing the material and how far I can push it, or in that instance with the how far I can literally blow it up. And they do sometimes. They'll have a little mini explosion when the welds break.
Do you miss having contact with a sculpting community, or does that give you the opportunity to find your own way and go in a different direction?
Yeah, sure. To be truthful, I had more contact with the sculptors when I was at Sandy Point because I was yearning for that. But now that we're at Anderson, because the studio's open all the time, we get a lot of artists walking through and yet have a lot of art contact. So I've actually pulled away a little bit from making contact with other art, a little bit like May, respectfully distant. and it's great. I've got, my wife's an artist too, so we're sort of always navigating around each other.
Warren mentioned to me that there are an estimated 5,000 visual artists in Gippsland, I think it was, Warren, and I wasn't at all surprised since it seems to me every second person I meet down here is an artist. I don't mean professional, they're plumbers and teachers, and they work at Bunnings and they work for the council, but they also write songs, they direct plays, they paint, they sing in chorales, they play in bands and orchestras. And I've wondered what it is that makes country people so much more, seems to me, so much more creative than city people living in the city. Is it because we're surrounded by nature, you know, those big skies, that big sea, so much beauty around us, all that space and time to think and feel? Or is it because we can't pop into the arts centre for a concert or go to the NGV for a blockbuster exhibition? Do any of you, Mark, do you feel as though...
I get to go to towns from time to time, and I do go to see blockbuster exhibition.
May, do you?
Yeah, I'd have to say I don't really think that there's a distinction with levels of creativity between regional or city or anywhere. I think there's creative people everywhere, and we're very glad that that's the case. Why regional Victoria is popular, I think one of the very practical things is that you can get cheaper working space. It's always really difficult to get studio space in city areas. Not that I've ever tried, but I know friends who have, and it's often the artists get shifted from building to building as things develop around them. Whereas in regional South Gippsland, which I can speak from because I've been there most of the time I've been working, there's always been an old farmhouse that you could rent really cheaply, or an abandoned building, or somewhere where artists could come and get a starting point with somewhere to live and somewhere to make work. So I think that just that very practical thing of cheaper and more generous working space is a fairly big factor for all the regional areas. Like Mark was saying, I think a lot of people involved in the arts travel fairly regularly to see exhibitions because we're interested in that.
What's interesting too is artists usually gentrify an area, like an area that might be run down. They move in and they're pretty resourceful, and they'll turn it round, and people want to live there because it's a creative place to be. And then it changes pretty quickly, like Brunswick Street years ago. Yeah, that's right. And the estate agents follow them around. Their own worst enemy.
Up until recently, though, in regional Victoria, you've not only been able to actually work in that space, and many times people have been able to buy it, on really reasonable terms that are applicable to very low-income people like creatives, because no one's been on a high salary probably ever in their life if they're working in the creative arts field. That's just how it is. No matter what kind of job you've got, you're very underpaid compared to most other professions. So we're all, whether well-employed or half-employed or self-employed, we're all pretty much on the lower end of what the financial, status is. And so to be able to actually have somewhere where you can have a stable working space, not be moved from place to place. Like I said, often people were able to buy a property quite cheaply and they could afford that on a low income. That was certainly my case, why I've got my workspace that I love and enjoy now, is because back in the early 80s, I was able to get a really cheap block of land in regional Victoria. Yeah, it's much harder to do that in the city. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's probably pretty much the same for us, May. We
same experience.
Got the studio, and you can really work your practice rather than worrying about real estate issues.
Because you can dream as much as you like, but you've got to have somewhere to work. And for me personally, I got so tired of painting in my bedroom, because in the shared houses I was in, nobody wanted me painting in the lounge room. Right? It's not a good thing. I can completely understand it. But, you know, in share houses, it doesn't work for you. You've got to have a space where you can just work and explore that. You make a mess, you know, leave it, do what you need to do, yeah.
Yes, the dream for many young artists is making a career, full-time career in the arts. No boring 9-to-5 job, bugger the superannuation and holidays. They want to be full-time artists, and you three have all been able to make a living in the arts in different ways. I know it's complicated. Mark, you've survived without ever getting a proper job. Was it luck or talent or something else?
Well, I consider it a proper job. I know the bank doesn't. I mean, if you go to the bank wanting a loan, they want an income. You know, they want to see an income.
A guaranteed income.
Yeah, that's it, a guaranteed income. But I think I'm very lucky because I've had patrons all along, and there are people who've collected my work, and I'm very grateful to that, and that's possibly it. I've never had any Australia Council grants or any public funding. I don't really apply for it because it's I feel it's sort of humiliating, and I'd rather put my energy into working, and I thought if the paintings were good enough, they'd sell. That's it. And it kind of worked out. I don't know. Yeah.
Andrew, you've said that making the sculptures is the enjoyable part, but there's a whole lot more to running an arts practice than that.
Probably out of an 8-hour workday, it'd probably be somewhere between 4 to 6 hours of actual on the tools. The other, because we're an open studio, we've got clients coming back and forth, and just there's admin, in entry, exit out of shows, materials, and then designing work. It's amazing. It's surprising. I especially the last few weeks, I've put a lot of man hours into admin and so on. It's but then you go back, making sculpture's easy. It's all the other components, all the stuff in the background. Yeah. And I'm with Mark. I've never got a grant, and I don't apply for them because I just find it's easier just to go and make more work and make sure the work's good, so it finds a lovely home. Yeah.
And May, if you can picture the young May Adams, and she's just begun to study art at college, and her horizons are expanding. She's really excited. Would you tell her not to get carried away, to get a sensible job, or would you say take a chance?
Definitely take a chance, yeah. Particularly for women, I think there's a lot of expectations of what your role will be in life. I come from a really large family and quite a conservative family. But fortunately for me, my mother was very supportive of creative work. And so, getting back to what you were talking about, Catherine, as a younger person, what would you say and do? I think there's more opportunities available in the arts than what you can imagine at the time, and you don't know what the future's going to hold. But certainly in the future of all of us, we need creative thinkers, and we need people who can think outside the square, if you like, have experience with experimentation, who are willing to take risks, and most of all, to put those creative leaps into practice in whatever you're doing. So the visual arts and music and all kinds of creative arts are the way that we learn to take those risks and to take those creative steps and build those aspects of our lives that help us to be more rounded individuals, I think, in the end. And that's across all kinds of fields. It's in the sciences, it's in the arts, whatever, but the visual arts is an area where that creative thinking is nourished and where it's nurtured and able to give visual form. Because not everything can be described in words. There's so much that can only be really described in visual form. And so by working with visual forms and textures and shapes and colour and all of the different languages that we have in the creative arts, we're all the time developing that aspect of ourselves which allows us to be more broader than what we were before. I don't know how else to say it, but not everything can be said in words. There's all other kinds of languages. So the more languages that we learn, the more broadly speaking we are a creative community. So if you're a younger person thinking, is it worthwhile me doing visual arts, whatever, if you've got a chance to do it, do it. Because it's going to help you in so many different ways. Even if you don't end up being a practicing artist, it's going to help all other aspects of your life. Take you on a journey, discovering creativity things.
Thanks, May. Do we have any questions from the audience? John?
Not sure whether it's a question, but it's a story that might resonate with Mark. I was teaching some Year 12 boys in South Yarra, and I was teaching them about Freddie Williams. And this boy came to me at the end of the class and said, I was really interested in that. And I said, well, he's got an exhibition on in South Yarra Galleries. You should, when you're going home, call in and talk to him if he's there. So the next day I said, did you go to Fred Williams' exhibition? And he said, yeah. And he was there, and I talked to him. And I said, tell me about it. And he said, well, I told him what you were teaching us. And he said, oh, that's just a lot of bullshit. And then he said, all I do is just chuck paint around. And I said, well, maybe that's so, but so you shouldn't put it in the exam paper.
I don't repeat that.
Well, there's lots of interesting anecdotes about artists and their shenanigans, and that's the beauty in what May was saying about how it's a visual language, and other artists respond to it immediately because they can see exactly what's gone into it, and how wonderful. That's right, it opens up the whole world for you, and it's sort of esoteric, and it's not in a way, and if you understand it, or the rudiments of it, the fundament of it, you can read it pretty quickly, and you can see a show or a painting and decide immediately, and it's not like having to read a whole novel or, I don't know, a thesis or something, or even watching a movie. But
Because not everybody likes sport, We've got a whole plethora of people out there who just don't really love sport, football or anything.
That's un-Australian.
And a lot of those young kids, talking about young people, a lot of young kids struggle with that because it's so dominant in our culture. And so the more that we can have, good arts educators, good opportunities for young people to see different ways of doing things and to enjoy the arts, it's really, really important.
Well, thank you so much to our esteemed artists, and to the rest of you, enjoy the exhibition, and even better, buy some works, because then you'll be able to enjoy them more, and our artists will be able to eat. Thank you.